Barricades. Barricades shall be used as needed to alert employees to potential hazards and indicate if authorization, protective measures or protective equipment is required. Barricades shall be a minimum of 3 feet back from the edge of excavations, holes, platforms and roofs unless a protective barricade is used. When personnel are exposed to a fall of 4 feet, general industry, or 6 feet, construction, or greater, then the barricade shall be a minimum of 6 feet away from the leading edge or the vertical drop. Protective barricades shall meet the requirements of CFR Title 29, 1926.500 fall protection when they are installed. Barricades may be required around certain work areas. These areas include but are not limited to excavations, floor and roof openings, edges of roofs and elevated platforms, around overhead work areas, elevated work areas, wherever necessary to warn employees of the potential for falling in, through or off. Hazardous material spill locations. Lifting and rigging activities to ensure personnel do not travel under suspended loads. Green cones may be used to warn of overhead lines. Working near or around pressurized operating systems such as fuel gas, instrument air, process water and steam if the work has a potential to affect personnel or industrial operations. Erecting barricades. Personnel who erect barricades shall be protected from recognizable hazards while installing and removing barricades. Such hazards include but are not limited to falling from heights, excavations, confined spaces, hazardous gas vapors, vehicle traffic, heavy equipment operations, maritime and work over or around water. Signs. Signs shall be placed on barricade stands, posts or other suitable surfaces. Signs shall be placed in visible locations before work starts and must be removed to proper storage areas when they are no longer needed. Signs shall be legible and maintained in a usable condition. Employees shall obey posted signs. Signals. Signals may be used in conjunction with barricades and signs to support certain activities or the routing of traveling personnel. When signals are used to guide vehicle traffic, they shall conform to Part 6 of the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, MUTCD. Signaling directions and garments worn by flaggers shall conform to Part 6 of the MUTCD. Use of yellow-black barricade tape. Use of red barricade tape. Removal of temporary barricades. Temporary barricades shall be removed promptly by the appropriate personnel when they are no longer needed. Population control. When lifting material overhead in a congested area, in lieu of a barricade, a skywatch wearing an orange vest and using a horn or whistle may be used to ensure that no one walks under a load. The skywatch will precede the load to ensure the pathway is clear. Respiratory protection. Each employee who is required to use a respirator shall be medically evaluated. Shall be trained in the fitting, use and care of respirators furnished to him or her by the company. An employee who requests or is required to use respiratory protection shall be provided with a respirator, provided the employee is medically fit and able to use it. He or she shall be fit tested, trained in the proper fit and use of the respirator and shall regularly clean, inspect and maintain the respirator in accordance with the respirator's instructions and with this plan. Only company-issued respirators shall be permitted for use. Air-supplied respirators shall be cleaned and sanitized after each use and shall be properly stored. Respirator cleaning wipes or equivalent are available from the EHS department. A respirator that is not properly maintained and cared for does not provide the intended protection. Maintenance. Occasionally, respirator parts need to be replaced. The user may be instructed to replace the canister, cartridges, filters or headbands. Replacing valves, gaskets and hoses should be done by the manufacturer, or by a person following manufacturer's directions. Replacement parts and components may not be interchanged between respirators of different manufacturers. Storage. Respirators must be stored to protect against dust, sunlight, extreme heat or cold, excessive moisture and damaging chemicals. The easiest way to do this is to use the resealable plastic bag and a designated storage area. A respirator should not be stored so that the facepiece and inhalation valve is resting on a surface. Health problems. Complications that may prevent an employee from wearing a respirator, and thus from working in a contaminated area. Information for employees using respirators when not required under the standard. Please consult your applicable WCC safety professional for further information. Hand and power tools. Hand and power tools are used every day in the construction industry. Hand tools are non-powered, including but not limited to axes, wrenches, and hammers. The greatest hazards posed by hand tools result from misuse and improper maintenance. Power tools can also be hazardous when improperly used. There are several types of power tools based on the power source they use: electric, pneumatic, liquid fuel, hydraulic, and powder actuated. Danger to the user is inherent in the use of any tool. If injury potential exists, the employer must ensure that the workers take steps to prevent an injury from occurring. In the process of removing or avoiding the hazards, workers must learn to recognize the hazards associated with the different types of tools and the safety precautions necessary to prevent those hazards. General safety precautions. Read the manufacturer's recommendations and warnings, understand them and use them to get the best use out of the tool. Identify and document the critical behaviors for safety for each tool used on site. Orient workers with the tools. Be sure to check that tools are in working order and have documented maintenance checks regularly. All hazards involved in the use of power tools can be prevented by following these 6 basic safety rules. Keep all tools in good conditions with regular maintenance. Use the right tool for the job. Examine each tool for damage before use. Operate according to the manufacturer's instructions. Provide and use the proper protective equipment. Do not hoist or lower tools by electric cords of electric power operated tools. Hoses of pneumatic power tools. Guards. Hazardous moving parts of a power tool need to be safeguarded. For example, belts, gears, shafts, pulleys, sprockets, spindles, drums, flywheels, chains or other reciprocating, rotating or moving parts of equipment must be guarded if such parts are exposed to contact by workers. Safety guards must never be removed when a tool is being used. Guards shall be provided to protect the operator and others from the following. Point of operation. In running nip points. Rotating parts. Flying chips and sparks. Confirm that impact tools, such as drift pins, wedges and chisels, are free of mushroomed heads. The wooden handles of tools must be tight-fitted and free of splinters or cracks. Wrenches, including adjustable, pipe, end and socket wrenches, must not be used when their jaws are sprung to the point that slippage occurs. Any other indication of a tool being hazardous must prevent it from being issued or permitted for use. Wiregrass Construction Company will inform workers that saw blades, knives or other tools be directed away from aisles and other workers who are working in close proximity. Knives and scissors must be sharp. Dull tools can sometimes be more hazardous than sharp ones. Around flammable substances, sparks produced by iron and steel hand tools can be a dangerous ignition source. Where this hazard exists, spark-resistant tools made from brass, plastic, aluminum or wood will be provided. The following general precautions should be observed by power tool users. Never yank the cord or the hose to disconnect it from the receptacle. Keep cords and hoses away from heat, oil and sharp edges. Disconnect tools when not in use, before servicing and when changing accessories such as blades, bits and cutters. All observers should be kept at a safe distance away from the work area. Secure work with clamps or a vise, freeing both hands to operate the tool. Avoid accidental starting. The worker should not hold a finger on the switch button while carrying a plugged-in tool. All fuel-powered tools are stopped while being refueled, serviced or maintained. Tools should be maintained with care. They should be kept sharp and clean for the best performance. Follow instructions in the user's manual for lubricating and changing accessories. Be sure to keep solid footing and maintain good balance. Loose clothing, ties or jewelry can become caught in moving parts. Workers using electric tools must be aware of several dangers. To protect the user from shock, tools must have a 3-wire cord with a ground prong and be grounded. Be double insulated. Double insulation protects the user and the tools by normal insulation on the wires inside and by a non-conductive housing in the tool. Ground fault circuit interrupters, GFIs, shall be used in damp areas and or when using a temporary power source. These general practices should be followed when using electric tools. Electric tools should be operated within their design limitations. Gloves and safety footwear are recommended for the use of electric tools. When not in use, tools should be stored in a dry place. Electric tools should not be used in damp or wet locations. Work areas should be well lit. Pneumatic tools. Personal protective equipment is critical to safety when working with tools powered by compressed air. For all pneumatic tools, eye protection is required and face protection is recommended. Working with noisy tools, such as jackhammers, requires the proper and effective use of hearing protection. Confirm that safety clips or retainers are installed to prevent attachments from being unintentionally shot from the barrel. If using clippers, riveting guns, staplers or air drills, screens must be set up to protect nearby workers from flying debris. Work with pneumatic power tools follows these guidelines. Never point a pneumatic tool at anyone, including yourself. Compressed air is not used for cleaning purposes except where reduced to less than 30 psi. The manufacturer's safe operating pressure for hoses, pipes, valves, filters and other fittings are not exceeded. All hoses exceeding 1/2 inch in diameter have a safety device at the source of supply or branch line to reduce pressure in case of hose failure. Hydraulic tools. When using hydraulic tools, the pressure and fluid used should not exceed the manufacturer's recommendations. The fluid must be an approved fire-resistant fluid and must retain its operating characteristics at the most extreme temperatures to which it will be exposed. The safe operating pressure for hoses, valves, pipes, filters and other fittings must not be exceeded. Abrasive wheels. Prior to mounting an abrasive wheel, a ring test or sound test should be conducted to ensure that the tool contains no cracks or defects. Tap the wheel gently with a non-metallic instrument and listen for a cracked or dead sound. If the wheel has a metallic or ringing sound, this indicates a working tool. However, if a wheel sounds cracked or dead, it may break apart during operation, and therefore should be set out of service and tagged appropriately. When mounting the wheel, prevent cracking by making sure that the wheel fits freely on the spindle. Do not over or under tighten the spindle nut. Refer to the manufacturer's recommendation. When turning on the tool, the operator should not stand directly in front of the wheels, as it may disintegrate. Due to the possibility of flying debris or wheel parts, protective eyewear must be worn at all times. Additionally, portable grinding tools must be equipped with safety guards to protect the user and other workers in the vicinity. Jacks. All jacks must be inspected before each use and lubricated regularly. If a jack is subjected to an abnormal load or shock, it should be thoroughly examined to make sure it has not been damaged. A thorough inspection of the jack should be done at least every 6 months and documented. Jacks must have their load limits permanently marked in a prominent location on the jack. These load limits must not be exceeded. Additionally, jacks must have a positive stop to prevent overtravel. A jack should never be used to support a lifted load. Once the load has been lifted, it must be immediately blocked. The jack should be level during use. This may require the use of wooden blocking underneath the jack's base. If the lift surface is metal, use a wooden block as a buffer to reduce slipping. To set up a jack, make certain of the following. The base rests on a firm, level surface. The jack is correctly centered. The jack head bears against a level surface. The lift force is applied evenly. Gasoline and other fueled tools. The most serious hazard with fuel-powered tools comes from fuel vapors that can burn or explode. Gasoline-powered tools shall not be used in unventilated areas. Gasoline shall be dispensed from only UL/FM-approved safety cans. These cans shall be properly labeled and stored. Fire extinguishers must be available in the area. Employees shall be careful while handling, transporting and storing gas or fuel in approved flammable liquid containers, according to proper procedures for flammable liquids. Before the tank for a fuel-powered tool is refilled, the user must shut the engine down and allow it to cool to prevent accidental igniting of hazardous vapors. Aerial lift devices. Training. Employees who operate aerial lifts, ergo JLG, scissor lifts, articulating boom platforms, etc., shall be trained, including demonstrated proficiency, and authorized prior to operating the equipment. Training documentation shall be maintained by Wiregrass Construction Company and made available upon request. General requirements. Wiregrass Construction Company shall utilize the aerial lift equipment checklist upon delivery prior to accepting any rented or leased equipment. Conduct a pre-start inspection of the equipment prior to use each day. The user shall be responsible for ensuring that this has occurred. Ensure warning placards on the machines are legible and personnel are familiar with the operator's manual. Ensure any malfunctioning lift is tagged out of service, and the supervisor is promptly notified. The equipment shall not be operated until repaired as per the manufacturer's recommendations. Ensure the controls are plainly marked as to their function and use equipment only on level ground. Not load platforms or baskets in excess of the design working load. The weight of personnel in baskets is counted as part of the load. Utilize aerial lifts for lifting personnel and small hand tools. Use of aerial lifts in lieu of a crane is prohibited. Ensure personnel consider the overall dimensions of the unit and always be sure that there is sufficient clearance before moving under any overhead obstruction or when working near electrical lines. All personnel shall not walk under a boom to gain access to the platform or tie the platform off to any structure for any reason. Stand on the platform floor. Standing or sitting on the railing is prohibited. Always look in the direction the machine is moving. Not rest the boom or basket on a steel structure of any kind. Wear safety harnesses and tie off to the manufacturer-provided anchorage point within the platform. This includes all aerial lifts, scissor lifts, etc. Attempt to perform work from within the basket at all times. If it becomes necessary to exit the basket at elevated heights, 100% fall protection methods shall be utilized during the transfer from the basket to an approved anchorage location. Erect barricading or use a flag person when operating in high-traffic areas. Ensure that a 10-pound fire extinguisher, mounted in the basket, is provided when performing activities that present a potential fire hazard. Keep hands off the external portion of the basket when raising or lowering the basket. Do not raise baskets with cords, leads, or hoses tied to the handrail. A tagline must be used to raise these items when the basket is in position to work. Confined spaces. Facility and equipment assessment. The purpose of a confined space program is to protect the worker from death or physical injury. In order to achieve this, an assessment of the facility must be conducted. This assessment should identify all the confined spaces that exist at the specific facility. Competent person means one who is capable of identifying existing and predictable hazards in the surroundings of working conditions which are unsanitary, hazardous, or dangerous to employees, and who has the authorization to take prompt corrective measures to eliminate them. Identify hazards of PRCS. Conduct initial testing. Knowledgeable in appropriate testing. Entry means the action by which any part of a person passes through an opening into a permit-required confined space. Entry includes ensuing work activities in that space and is considered to have occurred as soon as any part of the entrance body breaks the plane of an opening into the space, whether or not such action is intentional or any work activities are actually performed in the space. Entry permit means the written or printed document that is provided by the employer who designated the space a permit space to allow and control entry into a permit space and that contains the information specified in Section 1926.1206. Authorized entrant means an employee who is authorized by the entry supervisor to enter a permit space. Attendant means an individual stationed outside one or more permit spaces who assesses the status of authorized entrants and who must perform the duties specified in Section 1926.1209. Entry supervisor means the qualified person, such as the employer, foreman, or crew chief, responsible for determining if acceptable entry conditions are present at a permit space where entry is planned, for authorizing entry and overseeing entry operations, and for terminating entry as required by this standard. Confined space identification. By federal definition, a confined space is large enough and so configured that an employee can bodily enter and perform assigned work. Has limited or restricted means for entry or exit. For example, tanks, vessels, silos, storage bins, hoppers, vaults and pits are spaces that may have limited means of entry or exit. Is not designated for continuous employee occupancy. Material feed bins. Liquid storage or fuel tanks. Aggregate dryers or drum mixers. Screen housings. Hot storage silos. Bag houses. Permit-required confined spaces. By federal definition, a permit-required confined space contains or has the potential to contain a hazardous atmosphere. Contains a material that has the potential for engulfing an entrant. Has an internal configuration such that an entrant could be trapped or asphyxiated by inwardly converging walls or by a floor which slopes downward to a smaller cross-section. Contains any other recognized serious safety or health hazard. Identifying hazards. Experience during prior work in the space. Review conditions encountered when in that particular confined space performing work in the past. Make note of any problems encountered. Example: poor ventilation, poor lighting, etc. Determine if any materials were stored or used in that particular confined space that may have a residual influence on a worker entering the space. Influence of external systems, conditions. Evaluate any leaks or material storage outside the confined space that may have an impact on the environment in the confined space. Check for possible problems from the exhaust of internal combustion engines, welders, front-end loaders, cranes, etc. Hazards generated by the actual work to be completed. Be aware of oxygen reduction and the fumes created during welding and cutting operations, as well as the potential for an explosion around open flames. Physical hazards in the work area. The lockout-tagout program should be referenced for proper procedures when entering the confined space. Other physical hazards should be recognized and measures implemented to protect the worker from these hazards. These physical hazards could include hot surfaces, wet or slippery surfaces, protruding pipes or structures, sharp edges, fall hazards, poor footing, inadequate lighting, insects, animals such as snakes, etc. Warning signs. If the workplace contains permit-required spaces, the employer shall inform exposed employees by posting danger signs or by any equally effective means of the existence and location of, and the danger posed by, the permit space. Equipment required for the entry and monitoring of a permit-required confined space is testing and monitoring equipment that is capable of determining if acceptable entry conditions exist before entry is authorized to begin. This equipment must first test the atmosphere for oxygen, then for combustible gases and vapors, and then toxic gases and vapors. Ventilating equipment needed to obtain acceptable entry conditions. Communication equipment, i.e., two-way radios, if necessary to keep in touch with one or more entrants. Personal protection equipment insofar as feasible engineering and work practice controls do not adequately protect the worker. Lighting equipment needed to enable employees to see well enough to work safely and to exit the space quickly in an emergency. Barriers and shields to protect the worker from hazards, weld screens, railings, etc. Equipment needed for safe ingress and egress by the authorized entrants, ladders, safety belts, lanyards, etc. Rescue and emergency equipment, except to the extent that the equipment is provided by rescue services. Any other equipment necessary for safe entry and rescue from permit spaces. Entry permit. Before entry is authorized, the employer shall document the following by preparing an entry permit. Specify acceptable entry conditions. Isolate the permit space. Purge, flush or ventilate the permit space as necessary to eliminate or control atmospheric hazards. Provide pedestrian, vehicle, or other barriers as necessary to protect entrants from external hazards. Verify that conditions in the permit space are acceptable for entry throughout the duration of an authorized entry. The permit must be canceled upon completion of the entry and after all entrants have exited. If conditions change, work must stop and a new permit must be issued only when additional safeguards are in place. Monitoring. Air and oxygen monitoring is required before entering any permit-required confined space. Oxygen levels in a confined space must be between 19.5% and 23.5%. Levels above or below will require the use of a self-contained breathing apparatus or other approved air-supplied respirator. Additional ventilation and oxygen level monitoring is required when welding is performed. The monitoring will check oxygen levels, explosive gas levels and carbon monoxide levels. Entry will not be permitted if explosive gas is detected above 1/2 the lower explosive limit. Qualitative and quantitative testing of the direct reading portable gas monitor. A bump test, function check, or calibration check of portable gas monitors should be conducted before each day's use in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. Any portable gas monitor that fails a bump test, function check, or calibration check must be adjusted by means of a full calibration procedure before further use, or removed from service. A full calibration should be conducted at regular intervals in accordance with instructions specified by the instrument's manufacturer, internal company policy or a regulatory agency. Explosive, flammable, combustible atmosphere. Concentrations greater than 10% of the lower flammability limit, LFL, or lower exposure limit, LEL, form a hazardous atmosphere. Concentrations above the LFL, LEL, and below the upper flammable limit, UFL, upper exposure limit, UEL, are explosive. Airborne combustible dust concentrations that obscure visibility to 5 feet or less are meeting or exceeding their LFL, LEL. Toxic atmosphere symptoms. Hydrogen sulfide, H2S, 10 ppm 8 hours OSHA P.E.L. 0.01 to 10 ppm rotten egg smell, 10 to 100 ppm loss of smell, 200 to 300 ppm respiratory irritation, 1000 to 2000 ppm fatal. Carbon monoxide, CO, 50 ppm 8 hours OSHA P.E.L. 35 ppm NIOSH 8 hour TWA. 200 ppm frontal lobe headache, 400 ppm headache, nausea, 3200 ppm unconsciousness, death in 30 minutes, 12,000 ppm death in 1 to 3 minutes. The attendant shall stand by and maintain communication with the authorized entrance while the space is occupied. Note: the attendant shall never enter the confined space, even during an emergency. If necessary, summon help and stand by the entrance to render assistance. The authorized entrant shall review the permit and sign the entry-exit log prior to entering a confined space. Install continuous ventilation to prevent accumulation of a hazardous atmosphere, as required by permit. Excavation and trenching. The company requires that all jobs involving excavations or trenching have been carefully planned, that documents are prepared, and that a competent person is available on site during the excavation activities. All underground utilities are located and protected, supported or removed. Warning lines are being kept at least 6 feet from open edges of trenches and excavations. Safe means of entry and exit are provided for excavations more than 4 feet deep. And access ladders are no more than 25 feet from the employees. Excavations or trenches left open shall be covered or properly barricaded. Excavation, trenching permit. An excavation permit is required for excavations and trenches that are 4 feet or greater, whether operations are performed by hand or by equipment. The competent person shall conduct daily inspections of excavations, adjacent areas and protective systems for evidence of situations that could result in possible cave-ins, indications of failure of protective systems, hazardous atmospheres or other hazardous conditions prior to the start of each shift and as needed throughout the shift. Inspect after every rainstorm or other occurrence that could increase the hazards. Determination of system. Note: WCC automatically classifies all soil as Type C. Type C protective measures shall be utilized for all excavations performed by WCC. Employees shall be protected from cave-ins by an adequate protective system for trenches over 4 feet in depth utilizing sloping, benching, shoring systems, shielding systems, heavy equipment operation. You are expected to care for all company equipment as if it were your own. Do not abuse company equipment as it is very costly to repair or replace. No employee shall operate any heavy equipment, dozers, excavators, loaders, scrapers, rollers, pavers, backhoes, brooms, etc. unless specifically authorized to do so by the supervisor responsible for that equipment. Unauthorized riders on equipment are strictly prohibited. Before operating any heavy equipment, each new or untrained employee will be required to either 1. Train under the supervision of the supervisor, or designee who has the knowledge, training and experience to train operators and evaluate their competence, or 2. Demonstrate his or her competence by performing practical exercises. Equipment inspection. At a minimum, the following items should be inspected prior to operation: oil, tires, brakes, horn, seatbelt, backup alarms, fire extinguishers. Any item found to be in unsafe condition shall be reported to your supervisor and the equipment shall be locked and tagged out of service until the required repairs are made. Horse playing on equipment is strictly prohibited. A safe speed shall be maintained while operating equipment. When repairs are made on site, make sure that the operator's controls are made inoperable via lockout, tagout, so that the equipment cannot be moved by another worker while repairs are being made. The proper way to mount and dismount any heavy equipment is to use a 3-point stance with 2 hands and 1 foot in contact with the ground or unit at all times. Never jump on or off equipment. When operating heavy equipment, visibility is restricted. The driver or operator shall look 360 degrees before traveling, especially when backing up. When traveling on a job site, remember personnel on foot always have the right of way. In congested areas, be very careful to watch for pipe layers, dump men, chain and cable handlers, grade checkers and stake hoppers. The operator must keep a clear view of the path of travel and observe for other traffic, personnel and safe clearances. Do not leave the machine running when you are off the machine. Operators of rubber-tired equipment shall make absolutely sure when backing up that they have positive knowledge that no one is behind their equipment. In the event that the operator cannot watch the back of his or her machine, he/she shall request that the foreman provide a flagman for him. Operators shall not back into any thoroughfare without a flagman to avoid backing over any person, structure or item. While operating heavy equipment, no operator is allowed to use devices that impede hearing, earphones from audio tape players and radios, etc. The operator shall never allow any riders on his or her equipment. There shall be no fender hanging or push-block riding for short distances. Both rider and operator shall be subject to severe disciplinary action for this violation. Riding on conveyors is absolutely prohibited. Using a loader bucket as a lift or as a means of worker transportation is strictly prohibited. If the equipment has a seatbelt, wear it. This safety feature may protect you in the case of an accident. Never start the motor from anywhere but in the operator's seat. Keep your hands, arms and legs inside the cab at all times. Always lower bowls or blades before leaving equipment at night or for extended periods during the workday. While traveling, forks, buckets, blades, etc. should be as close to the traveling surface as the terrain will allow. When moving equipment along highways or streets, all safety regulations shall be strictly observed, such as flags, wide load signs, permits and the zone laws in the area for the size of the machine. Loading and unloading of equipment shall be performed with extreme care, and operators are requested to seek help as necessary. Never take chances. The operator shall be responsible for damage to the machine, property of others and public utilities in the area of operations or while traveling along highways. Never operate equipment without proper brakes. Report any malfunction of equipment that might endanger yourself or others. If you are unsure about how to do any assigned job, ask your supervisor. Keep your mind on your business. Respirable Crystalline Silica Program. The purpose of this silica program is to prevent employee exposure to hazardous levels of respirable crystalline silica that could result from construction activities or nearby construction activities occurring on work sites or plant sites. Respirable crystalline silica exposure at hazardous levels can lead to lung cancer, silicosis, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and kidney disease. All work involving chipping, cutting, drilling, grinding or similar activities on materials containing crystalline silica can lead to the release of respirable-sized particles of crystalline silica. Crystalline silica is a basic component of soil, sand, granite and many other minerals. Quartz is the most common form of crystalline silica. Many materials found on construction and plant sites include crystalline silica, including but not limited to cement, concrete, asphalt, pre-formed structures, inlets, pipe, etc., and others. Employees follow recognized work procedures, such as the construction tasks identified in OSHA's Construction Table 1, as established in the project's ECP and this program. Use the assigned PPE in an effective and safe manner. Participate in respirable crystalline silica exposure monitoring and the medical surveillance program. Report any unsafe conditions or acts to the site manager and/or competent person. Report any exposure incidents or any signs or symptoms of silica illness. Specified exposure control methods. When possible and applicable, Wiregrass Construction Company will conduct activities with potential silica exposures to be consistent with OSHA's Construction Standard Table 1. Supervisors will ensure each employee under their supervision and engaged in a task identified on OSHA's Construction Standard Table 1 have fully and properly implemented the engineering controls, work practices and respiratory protection specified for that task. When implementing the control measures specified in Table 1, see WCC Complete Manual for more information. For tasks performed using wet methods, apply water at flow rates sufficient to minimize the release of visible dust. For measures implemented that include an enclosed cab, ensure that the enclosed cab is clean and maintained as free as practicable from settled dust. Has door seals and closing mechanisms that work properly. Has gaskets and seals that are in good condition and working properly. Is under positive pressure maintained through continuous delivery of fresh air. Has intake air that is filtered through a filter that is 95% efficient in the 0.0 to 10.0 μm range. Has heating and cooling capabilities. The cab air filter is cleaned at least weekly or more.